Imagine a map. Not the kind you pull up on your phone. A real map. Calfskin parchment, hand-drawn coastlines, compass roses inked in fading gold. Now zoom in, past the trade routes of the Atlantic, past the sugar colonies of the Caribbean, past the fortified harbors of Port Royal and Nassau. Zoom in on the open water between those dots. That blue emptiness where no flag flies and no law reaches. That is where the pirate captain lived. Not in some romantic tavern on a tropical island. Not buried up to his neck in treasure chests. Out there, in the middle of nothing. Commanding a rotting wooden ship held together with tar and prayer, surrounded by 50 to 200 men who could vote him out of power before breakfast. The pirate captain is one of the most misunderstood figures in history. Hollywood gave us the hat, the parrot, the swagger, the gold teeth. But the real pirate captain was something far more interesting than any of that. He was an elected leader in an age of kings. A tactician who fought the most powerful navies on Earth with stolen ships and improvised weapons. A manager of violent, desperate men who had to keep morale high, food stocked, and mutiny at bay, all while being hunted by every government with a coastline. And most of them were dead before they turned 40. This is what life was really like for the most feared man at sea. To understand the pirate captain, you first have to understand who became one. And the answer might surprise you, because almost none of them set out to be pirates. The vast majority of pirate captains in the Golden Age, roughly 1650 to 1730, came from one of three backgrounds. They were former naval officers, former merchant sailors, or former privateers. The key word in all three cases is former. Something went wrong. They were discharged, cheated out of pay, abused by their superiors, or simply left without employment when a war ended and the crown no longer needed their services. Take Bartholomew Roberts, who became the most successful pirate of the Golden Age, capturing over 400 ships. But when he was taken by pirates off the coast of West Africa in 1719, he was a third mate on a slave-trading vessel with zero interest in piracy. The pirates offered the crew a choice: join or be marooned. Roberts joined, and within 6 weeks, the crew elected him captain because he was the best navigator aboard. That is not the origin story you see in the movies. There was no dramatic oath sworn under a skull and crossbones flag. No romantic rebellion against the crown. A man got captured, made a practical decision, and then got promoted because he was good at his job. Henry Every started as a first mate on a privateer called the Charles II. The captain was a drunk who couldn't manage the crew. Every led a mutiny while the captain was passed out, took control of the ship, and renamed it the Fancy. Within 2 years, he pulled off the richest pirate heist in history, capturing the Mughal Emperor's treasure ship in the Indian Ocean. The haul was worth between £200,000 and £600,000. In today's money, well over $100 million. But here is the part nobody talks about. Every's mutiny was not some daring act of rebellion. It was closer to a workplace dispute. The crew had not been paid in months. The investors who funded the voyage were swindling everyone. Every stepped into a leadership vacuum, and the crew followed because he was the only officer who seemed competent. And that pattern repeats over and over again. Edward Teach, Blackbeard himself, likely served as a privateer during Queen Anne's War before turning to piracy when the war ended in 1713 and thousands of sailors were suddenly unemployed. Charles Vane was a common sailor before the end of the War of Spanish Succession left him without work. Stede Bonnet is the famous exception, a wealthy plantation owner from Barbados who apparently bought a ship and turned pirate for reasons historians still argue about. But Bonnet is the exception that proves the rule. He was terrible at it. His own crew eventually voted to replace him with someone who actually knew how to sail. Because that is the thing about pirate captains that separates them from every other type of leader in the early 18th century. They were elected. Consider what that means in context. In 1715, the King of England ruled by divine right. Naval captains held absolute authority granted by the crown. Merchant captains could flog their sailors, withhold pay, and throw men in the brig for looking at them wrong. The entire structure of maritime power was top-down and brutal. Pirate ships flipped that completely. When a pirate crew needed a captain, they held a vote. Every man on the ship got one vote, regardless of rank, race, or background. The captain was chosen based on three qualities: courage in battle, skill in navigation, and the ability to keep the crew together. If at any point the crew felt their captain was failing in any of these areas, they could call another vote and replace him. This was not symbolic. It happened constantly. Charles Vane was voted out by his own crew after he refused to attack a French warship. The crew considered it cowardice. They elected Calico Jack Rackham in his place, gave Vane a small sloop and a handful of loyal men, and sent him on his way. Edward England was deposed after he showed mercy to a captured captain and let the man go free. His crew felt he was too soft. They marooned him on the island of Mauritius. Before we go any further, I need to stop for a second, because what I've been showing you in these videos only scratches the surface. And I realized at some point that the full picture, the actual pirate code, word for word, the real punishment records, the exact treasure division shares, the ports that secretly funded them, it doesn't fit in a video. I put it all into one document, the Black Flag Codex. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's keep going. He eventually made a raft, sailed to Madagascar, and spent the rest of his short life begging for food. The captain held authority in only two situations, during battle and during a chase. In those moments, his word was absolute. He could order any maneuver, assign any position, demand any sacrifice, and refusal meant death. But the instant the fighting stopped, his power shrank dramatically. He could not punish crew members on his own. He could not decide how to divide plunder. He could not even choose where the ship sailed next. All of those decisions went to a vote, and standing beside the captain, often with more consistent power, was the quartermaster. The quartermaster was also elected, and his role was essentially to represent the crew's interests against the captain's authority. Think of it like a checks and balances system, centuries before most governments figured out that concentrating power in one person was a bad idea. The quartermaster handled discipline, settled disputes, divided the loot, and managed supplies. If there was a disagreement between the captain and the crew, the quartermaster mediated. If the captain overstepped his authority, the quartermaster could call for a vote. In many ways, the quartermaster was the real day-to-day leader of a pirate ship. The captain was the war leader, the decision-maker in crisis. But the quartermaster ran the ship. This arrangement was spelled out in a document that almost every pirate crew signed before sailing. The Articles of Agreement. These were written contracts that specified everything. How loot would be divided, what compensation a man received if he lost a limb in battle, what the penalties were for fighting aboard ship, stealing from fellow crew members, or bringing a candle near the gunpowder stores. The articles established the captain's authority and its limits. They were, for all practical purposes, a constitution. And the terms were remarkably fair by the standards of the time. On a typical merchant vessel, the captain might take 14 times what an ordinary sailor earned. On a pirate ship operating under standard articles, the captain usually received 2 shares of any prize. The quartermaster received 1.5. Every other man received 1 full share. That ratio, roughly 2 to 1 between the highest and lowest paid person aboard, was more equitable than almost any other workplace in the Western world in the early 1700s. Now, here is where the romance ends and the reality begins. Because even with democratic governance and relatively fair pay, life aboard a pirate ship was absolutely miserable. Start with the ship itself. Pirates almost never had purpose-built warships. They sailed captured vessels, usually merchant sloops or brigantines that were never designed for combat. These ships were constantly leaking, their hulls fouled with barnacles and worms, their rigging frayed, their sails patched. Careening, The process of beaching a ship and scraping the hull clean had to be done every few months in tropical waters, or the ship would slow to a crawl. But careening required finding a hidden inlet, offloading all the guns and supplies, and spending days exposed and defenseless on shore. It was one of the most vulnerable moments in a pirate crew's existence. Several famous crews were captured during careening. Below decks, conditions were nightmarish by any standard. There were no cabins for ordinary crew. Men slept wherever they could find space, crammed between cargo, cannons, and barrels. The air below was thick with the smell of bilge water, unwashed bodies, rotting food, and rat droppings. Ventilation was almost non-existent. In the Caribbean heat, the temperature below decks could reach well over 100 degrees. The captain had slightly better quarters, usually a small cabin at the stern. But even this was modest. On most pirate ships, the captain's cabin was roughly the size of a modern walk-in closet. It contained a narrow bed, a table for charts, and whatever personal belongings the captain owned. There was no luxury. There was barely comfort. The main privilege of the captain's cabin was privacy, and even that was limited, since crew members walked through it regularly to access the tiller. Food was another constant problem. Fresh provisions lasted only days in tropical heat. After that, the crew lived on hardtack, salt pork, and whatever fish they could catch. Hardtack, a dry cracker baked to last months at sea, was typically infested with weevils within weeks. Experienced sailors learned to eat it in the dark so they could not see what they were chewing. Salt pork was preserved in brine barrels, but often went rancid. When food ran truly short, crews ate leather, candle wax, and rats. Water was even more critical. Fresh water stored in wooden casks went stale and green within weeks, growing algae and breeding mosquito larvae. This is one of the reasons pirates drank so much alcohol. Beer, rum, and wine stayed drinkable far longer than water. The stereotype of the constantly drunk pirate is not entirely wrong, but it was less about celebration and more about survival. Drinking contaminated water killed you. Drinking grog kept you alive. The captain was responsible for managing these supplies, and running out of water or food was one of the fastest ways to face a mutiny. Disease killed far more pirates than combat ever did. Scurvy was endemic on long voyages, progressing from fatigue and bleeding gums to open wounds, teeth falling out, and death. Dysentery spread through contaminated water, killing men within days. Malaria and yellow fever were constant threats in the Caribbean and along the African coast. Wounds sustained in battle almost always became infected in the filthy conditions below decks. A minor cut could turn fatal within a week. Most pirate ships did not carry a surgeon. When they captured a merchant vessel, one of the most valuable prizes was not gold or silk, but the ship's doctor. Surgeons were frequently pressed into pirate service against their will, kept aboard precisely because their skills were irreplaceable. When no surgeon was available, the carpenter often served as the ship's medical officer because his tools, saws, chisels, and drills were the closest things available to surgical instruments. So, the pirate captain governed all of this. He managed a floating village of sick, hungry, often drunk men, held together by the promise of prize money and the threat of the gallows if they were captured. And he had to do it while also being a competent naval tactician because the entire enterprise depended on successfully attacking and capturing other ships. Pirate combat was nothing like what you see in movies. The goal was almost never to sink the other ship. A sunken ship meant sunken cargo, and cargo was the entire point. The ideal pirate attack was one where no shots were fired at all. The captain's first weapon was psychology. Pirates flew false flags, disguising themselves as merchant vessels or naval ships until they were close enough to reveal their true colors. The Jolly Roger, in its many variations, was not just a symbol, it was a negotiation tool. A black flag meant surrender, and you will be treated well. A red flag meant no quarter. We will kill everyone. Most merchant ships surrendered the moment they saw pirate colors. And this was a rational decision, not cowardice. Merchant sailors were poorly paid, often abused by their captains, and had zero incentive to die fighting for someone else's cargo. When a pirate ship pulled alongside and the captain shouted his terms, the average merchant crew started lowering their sails before their own captain could object. But when a target chose to fight, or when pirates attacked a well-armed vessel, the captain's tactical skill became everything. Pirate captains preferred to attack from the windward side, using wind advantage to close distance quickly. They would stop for a second. What you just heard about the pirate code is the part that rewrites everything you thought you knew. But it only lands when you see the actual shares, the exact fractions written into the Articles of Agreement, the punishments, the port records, the names of the men who funded them from government offices. It's all in the Black Flag Codex, linked in the description. 5 seconds. Grab it now, because what comes next builds directly on it. Link is below. QR code is on your screen. Fire, chain shot, and bar shot to destroy the enemy's rigging and sails, crippling their ability to flee. Then they would pull alongside, throw grappling hooks, and board. The boarding action was where pirate captains earned their reputation. The captain was expected to be among the first across, leading the charge. This was not optional. A captain who hung back during a boarding action lost the respect of his crew instantly. Blackbeard was famous for strapping multiple pistols across his chest because reloading took too long in close combat. He would fire each pistol once, then draw his cutlass. Bartholomew Roberts, dressed in crimson silk, and wore a diamond-studded cross around his neck during battle, making himself impossible to miss. The captains who survived longest were the ones who projected absolute fearlessness, whether they felt it or not. Close combat on the deck of a rolling ship was chaotic and brutal. Cutlasses, boarding axes, pistols, grenades, and knives in tight quarters. Smoke from black powder obscured everything. The decks were slippery with blood. Men fell between ships and drowned. There was no formation, no strategy beyond overwhelming violence. Fights rarely lasted more than 15 minutes. After a successful capture, the captain oversaw the interrogation of the captured crew. This was a calculated process. Pirates wanted to know what cargo the ship carried, whether there was hidden treasure, and, crucially, how the captured ship's captain had treated his men. If captured sailors testified that their captain had been fair and decent, the pirate crew often let him keep his personal belongings and sent him on his way. If they testified he had been cruel, the captured captain could face torture, flogging, or death. This was not random sadism, it was strategic justice. Pirates needed merchant sailors to believe that surrender would be treated fairly. If captured crews were systematically brutalized, future targets would fight to the death, costing pirate lives and damaging cargo. The reputation for fair treatment of cooperating prisoners was a tactical asset that successful captains carefully maintained. But there was another side to this. Some captains deliberately cultivated a reputation for extreme violence, understanding that terror was its own weapon. Blackbeard reportedly tied slow-burning fuses into his enormous beard before battle, wreathing his face in smoke and giving him a demonic appearance. Edward Lowe tortured captured captains with gleeful creativity, reportedly cutting off a man's lips, cooking them in front of him, and forcing him to eat them. Whether all these stories are true is debatable. Some were certainly exaggerated for propaganda purposes, but the exaggeration was part of the strategy. The more terrifying the reputation, the more ships surrendered without a fight. The pirate captain also had to manage his crew's expectations about prize money, and this was one of the most difficult parts of the job. The popular image of pirates swimming in gold is almost entirely fictional. The vast majority of pirate captures yielded mundane cargo: textiles, sugar, tobacco, timber, rope, food supplies. These goods had to be sold through fences, usually corrupt colonial merchants who bought stolen cargo at steep discounts. A haul that was worth 10,000 pounds on the open market might net the pirates 2,000 or 3,000, and that money went fast. Pirates spent lavishly in port, partly because they enjoyed the excess, but also because they had no way to save money safely. There were no pirate banks. Burying treasure was extremely rare despite the legends. Most pirates cycled between enormous wealth and near total poverty with every voyage. The captain's share, even at double the standard rate, was rarely enough to retire on. Bartholomew Roberts, the most successful pirate captain of the era, reportedly said that a pirate's life was one of a merry life and a short one. He was right. His own career lasted about 3 years before a British warship killed him in battle off the coast of Africa. He was around 40 years old. And that brings us to the part of the pirate captain's life that the songs and stories gloss over. The ending. The golden age of piracy lasted roughly 80 years, and during that time, the overwhelming majority of pirate captains met one of 3 fates. They were killed in battle, captured and hanged, or died of disease. Retirement was vanishingly rare. The hangings were public spectacles, deliberately designed to terrify anyone considering a pirate career. Captured pirates were tried in admiralty courts, which did not use juries. A panel of judges, usually colonial officials with direct financial interests in stopping piracy, heard the evidence and rendered verdicts. Conviction rates were astronomical. Once sentenced, pirates were hanged at the waterline, their bodies left to swing in iron cages called gibbets until they rotted. The gibbets were placed at harbor entrances so that every sailor entering port would see them. Captain William Kidd was hanged in London in 1701. His body was tarred, placed in a gibbet, and left hanging at Tilbury Point on the Thames for over 20 years. Calico Jack Rackham was hanged in Port Royal in 1720, and his gibbet was placed on a small quay at the harbor entrance that is still called Rackham's Quay today. Charles Vane was hanged in Jamaica in 1721 after being captured, shipwrecked, and recognized by a former victim. Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, was hanged in Charleston in 1718 despite public petitions for his pardon. The royal pardons offered periodically by the British Crown did save some pirates, but even these were a gamble. Woodes Rogers, the first royal governor of the Bahamas, arrived in Nassau in 1718 with a proclamation offering pardon to any pirate who surrendered within a year. Many accepted, including Benjamin Hornigold, who had mentored Blackbeard. But taking the pardon meant giving up the only life many of these men knew, and several returned to piracy within months. Charles Vane refused the pardon outright, firing on Rogers' ships as he fled Nassau Harbor. Blackbeard accepted a pardon from the governor of North Carolina, settled briefly in the town of Bath, and even married. But within months, he was back at sea. Whether he was lured back by ambition or simply found domesticity unbearable, the result was the same. Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy cornered Blackbeard at Ocracoke Inlet in November 1718. The battle was savage. Blackbeard reportedly took 5 musket balls and 20 cutlass wounds before he finally fell. Maynard cut off his head and hung it from the bowsprit of his ship as proof. Henry Every was one of the very few who might have gotten away with it. After his enormous haul from the Mughal treasure ship, he sailed to the Bahamas, bribed the governor, and vanished from the historical record. Some accounts say he lived quietly in England. Others say he was cheated by merchants and died in poverty. Nobody knows, but his disappearance became legendary precisely because it was so unusual. Almost every other pirate captain's story ends with a rope or a bullet. The captains who lasted longest, men like Roberts and Blackbeard, shared certain traits that are worth examining. They understood that their authority was conditional. They maintained crew loyalty through a combination of success, fairness, and spectacle. Roberts enforced strict articles that prohibited gambling, required lights out by 8 in the evening, and mandated that every man keep his weapons clean and ready for action. He dressed extravagantly, maintained rigid personal discipline despite the chaos around him, and led from the front in every engagement. Blackbeard took a different approach. He cultivated an image of terrifying unpredictability. He was reportedly generous with his crew, sharing prizes equally and protecting men who served him well. But he also cultivated an aura of madness that kept everyone, crew and enemies alike, slightly off balance. There is a famous story about Blackbeard closing the hatches of his ship's hold, lighting pots of sulfur, and challenging his crew to see who could endure the choking fumes the longest. He won, of course. Whether it actually happened, the story served its purpose. It told the world that Blackbeard was not entirely sane, and you did not want to test him. Both men also understood something that separated successful pirate captains from failed ones. You had to keep moving. A pirate ship sitting in port was a target. Colonial governors who tolerated pirates one month might hang them the next, depending on which way the political wind was blowing. Naval patrols increased every year. Informants were everywhere. The captain who stayed too long in one place was the captain who got caught. This constant motion created a strange existence. Pirate captains had no home, no community beyond their crew. They moved through the world as outsiders, welcome nowhere for long, trusted by no one outside their ship. The bonds within a pirate crew were intense precisely because these men had nothing else. They were outcast together, and the captain was the outcast in chief. There is something worth noting about who served alongside these captains. Pirate crews were among the most diverse groups of people assembled anywhere in the early 18th century. English, Irish, Scottish, Dutch, French, Spanish, Portuguese, African, Caribbean, and indigenous sailors all served on pirate ships. Former enslaved men made up a significant portion of many crews. On some ships, black pirates held positions of authority, voted alongside white crew members, and received equal shares of prize money. This was not egalitarian paradise. Racism existed on pirate ships as it did everywhere else. But the practical realities of piracy, where every able-bodied man counted and skill mattered more than origin, created opportunities that existed almost nowhere else in the colonial world. Some captains actively pursued this diversity. Black Sam Bellamy, whose flagship, the Whydah, was a former slave ship, reportedly freed the enslaved people aboard captured slavers and offered them a place in his crew. Several accepted. When the Whydah sank off Cape Cod in a storm in 1717, the recovered wreck contained artifacts from dozens of different cultures, a physical record of the crew's diversity. And then there were the women. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, who served under Calico Jack Rackham, are the most famous, but they were likely not the only women who sailed under the black flag. Both Bonny and Read, dressed as men, fought with the same ferocity as any other crew member, and were reportedly among the last standing when Rackham's ship was captured by pirate hunters in 1720. While Rackham and the rest of the crew were below decks, reportedly too drunk to fight, Bonny and Read stood on deck and engaged the attackers. At Rackham's trial, Bonny allegedly told him that if he had fought like a man, he would not have been hanged like a dog. The pirate captain existed in a world that was incredibly small. The Caribbean Basin, the coast of West Africa, the Indian Ocean, and the waters off colonial North America. These were the hunting grounds, and every captain knew them intimately. They knew which channels were deep enough for their draft, which islands had fresh water, which colonial governors could be bribed and which could not, where the trade winds shifted seasonally, and where the naval patrols concentrated. Navigation was both science and art. Most pirate captains could use a compass, a quadrant, and dead reckoning to fix their position. But charts were expensive and often deliberately inaccurate, since colonial powers did not want pirates using good maps. Stolen charts were prized. A captured navigator was almost as valuable as a captured surgeon. The captain, who could read the sea, who could feel a change in the current or predict weather by the color of the sky, had an advantage no chart could provide. The end of the Golden Age came not from any single battle, but from a slow tightening of the noose. Colonial governments became more organized. Naval patrols grew more frequent and better armed. The Piracy Act of 1717 gave colonial courts broader authority to try and execute pirates. Merchants began arming their ships and traveling in convoys. The economic conditions that had created a surplus of desperate sailors began to ease as trade expanded and naval employment became available. One by one, the great captains fell. Roberts was killed in 1722. Vane was hanged in 1721. Rackham in 1720. Blackbeard in 1718. Bellamy drowned in 1717. By 1730, the Golden Age was effectively over. Piracy did not disappear, but it lost the scale, the organization, and the strange democratic culture that had defined its peak. What remains is a legacy that is far more complicated than the stories we tell about it. The pirate captain was not a romantic rebel or a noble outlaw. He was a man who chose, or was forced into, a life outside every institution his world offered. He governed by consent in an age of tyranny. He built something that resembled democracy decades before the American or French revolutions. He created a workplace more equitable than any legitimate employer of his time. And he did all of this while starving, sick, hunted, and virtually guaranteed to die young. The seas these captains sailed are still there. The trade routes they raided still carry cargo across the same waters. The harbors they terrorized are now resort towns and cruise ship ports. Nassau, once the pirate republic, is a tourist destination. Port Royal, once the wickedest city on earth, lies mostly underwater after an earthquake swallowed it in 1692. Ocracoke, where Blackbeard died, is a quiet vacation island off the coast of North Carolina. But if you stand on any of those shores and look out at the open water, you can still feel something of what drew those men out there. The absolute freedom of a ship under sail, answerable to no one, bound for nowhere in particular, with everything to gain and everything to lose on any given day. That is what life was really like for the most feared man at sea. It was short, it was brutal, it was democratic, and it was, for the men who lived it, the only freedom they ever knew.